Hello, and I suggest you watch the first part of the series just to get up to speed. Having said that, in this video we'll be talking about how Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and Fury Road were made. So let's begin. Now, by the time of writing the story for Mad Max 3, George Miller was already really obsessed with storytelling and myths. And he wanted to shoot Mad Max 3 at Kata, also known as the Olgas, which is a sacred Aboriginal place in the central desert of Australia. To film anything there, you gotta have permission from the tribal elders. So, movie's location manager, George Mannix, went there to meet up with the Aboriginal elders. He explained the plot of Mad Max 3, he showed them the storyboards, and then something amazing happened. They said that they heard the story of Mad Max before in their legends.
And as he described the scenes and showed them our storyboards, something very special happened. They'd heard the Mad Max story before.
And at this point, George Miller must have been over the moon. I mean, he was once again validated that he tapped into a common myth once more. And this time it was confirmed by Aboriginal elders. Visually, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome is heavily, and I really mean it, heavily inspired by Lawrence of Arabia. There's really no doubt about that. Max's look, shot composition, even some scenes look like they've been just directly inspired by that movie, if not ripped off completely. And if you ever wondered why the music in both movies sounds similar, well, that's because it was written by the same guy, Maurice Jarre. Now, if you want to check out the complete list of similarities, just go and hit the link in the description. It will lead you to a blog where a friend of mine posted all of them, and I'm pretty sure that will blow your mind. But what about this story? Was it really dreamt up in this hypnagogic state by Miller and Hayes? Well, prepare yourselves to be a little disappointed. This is Russell Hoban, the author of a book called Ridley Walker. Sometime before Mad Max 3, he contacted George Miller and Terry Hayes because he wanted them to adapt this book, Ridley Walker, into a movie. It's a post-apocalyptic book about a tribe that speaks in a bastardized version of English, and they have their own rituals and reuse old technology. So after seeing Mad Max 2, Russell Hoban thought, George Miller and Terry Hayes, they're the right people to adapt his book into a movie. And what happened then was this.
So somebody arranged for me to meet him, and he took me out to dinner very nicely with his scriptwriter, and I gave him a copy of Ridley Walker, and said I hoped he would give some thought to making a film of it, and I never heard from him again. And then the next thing, I began to get letters from people, have you seen Mad Max 3? And you got ripped off, did they give you credit, did they give you money? And they didn't give me credit, they gave me money. But I talked to my agent about it, and he said, what it is that obviously this was a major influence, but that's all it is. It is not enough to sue him for. And so that's how it was. No. I hope he lies awake at night and thinks about it, but I don't think he does.
When I found out about it, it raised a lot of questions. I mean, how original Mad Max movies really are. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to get inspired and just take different elements and bits and pieces from different stories and just, put them together and make something new. That's just how stories are made, that's a normal process. Everything is a remix of a remix. But when you actually steal some stuff from somebody and then you don't give him any credit, that just sucks, man. It's not a good look. And I kind of started wondering, is George Miller sort of hiding behind the idea that he dreams those stories up while in reality he just borrows a whole lot of things from other places? Is it even him who's borrowing stories from others? Maybe it was Terry Hayes, the script co-creator. I wish I could answer all those questions definitely once and for all, but I can't. It's next to impossible at this point, and yet the evidence is right there. But maybe things will get better with Fury Road, so let's find out. The very origin of Fury Road can be traced back to three events that happened between 1996 and 1997. Originally, George Miller wanted to make a Mad Max TV series, and he was impressed with Brendan McCarthy's work on a CGI TV show called Reboot. He met up with McCarthy in Los Angeles in 1996 in order to work on this Mad Max TV show, But McCarthy pitched him a rudimentary plot for the next Mad Max movie instead, which went something like this.
I just gave him the idea, and it basically was Max goes through this blighted landscape with these. I thought the weather by then would have got really ridiculously bad, with massive storms and all the rest of it. He's got to go through down this sort of horrible landscape, and then he gets to the final place, which is like a giant castle. It's run by this guy. Inside the package that Max has been protecting all the time, the guy is a little squirt silver cube. And the guy puts it in sunlight, and it's solar activated, and it pings open, and inside it is a little vial. And the guy then says, "Come out." And this young girl, age 14, steps out from this room, and he's been keeping her sort of perfect. And then he says, "This is pure sperm, and I'm going to breed her," because the idea was to set the movie in the extinction of the human race. That's what I pitched him, and that's what became Fury Road.
So yeah, the original pitch was a bit out there, but it was interesting enough for Miller to consider. Sometime in 1997, George Miller was crossing the street in Los Angeles, and he suddenly had this idea for a movie where the entire story would be told completely on the run. A movie that is a continuous chase, if you will. Something that lends itself to a new Mad Max film in essence. But George Miller dismissed that idea. The last thing he wanted to make was yet another Mad Max movie, but this idea for a potential new Mad Max film just would not go away. And eventually, George Miller gave in. George Miller was on a flight from LA to Sydney, and he again got himself into this hypnagogic, half-asleep state, and in it, he dreamt up the entirety of the next Mad Max movie. It would be a combination of McCarthy's original pitch and Miller's idea for a continuous chase film. Okay, so that's an interesting story in itself, but when you look at Miller's track record of his inspirations and borrowing stuff from other works, combined with his fascination with mythology and storytelling, I started thinking, hold up, maybe there was something more in the mix, something that we missed, some kind of inspiration that he never told anyone about. So I started picking it apart, and the first thing I noticed was, why all of a sudden we got 5 girls instead of 1? I mean, the story would work just the same with 1, so why is there 5 of them now? Actually, scratch that. George Miller wanted to have 7 girls at first, but he just couldn't fit them all into the cabin of the war rig.
The only reason it's 5 brides that are being chased by the warlord is that we couldn't fit 7 into a car.
So, 7 girls, wives, sisters, whatever you want to call it, escaping a bad guy who's infatuated with their beauty and wants them for himself. He chases them across the Australian outback. Wait a minute, that's a myth of the Pleiades. It's a very common myth among many cultures around the world, but let's focus on the Aboriginal Dreamtime version of it because, Australia. It goes like this. The 7 Napalgari sisters are escaping a Jakamara man who's in love with them and wants to take one of the sisters for his wife. They travel across the Australian land, and then from a steep hill, they launch themselves into the sky in an attempt to escape, forming the Pleiades star cluster you see in the night sky. Alright, so that kind of sounds familiar. So, is it possible that Fury Road is a retelling of the Aboriginal version of the Pleiades myth? Well, get your tinfoil hats out because I'm about to start theorizing. None of it is actually officially confirmed, just my theory, alright? So if you're not into it, click away. If you want to hear my theory, stick around. Personally, I think the myth of the Pleiades at least played some role in the creation of Fury Road, and there's a few reasons why. First of all, it's a common myth. Something Joseph Campbell was talking about, and it's something that George Miller is really into. And Miller was even asked about the similarities between the Pleiades myth and Fury Road in one of the interviews, but he said that he was not aware of the similarities between the two when they were making this movie.
In the indigenous Australian culture, one of the creation stories is the story of 7 sisters escaping some malignant male, and they help create the topography and all the nature around. And there's only an afterthought that I figured out, we're telling that story.
So, did he dream Fury Road up in this half-asleep, hypnagogic state? Yeah, no, I'm not buying that. Besides, even if Miller wasn't inspired by ancient myths, Brendan McCarthy most definitely was. And he was really pushing for this one specific scene to be in the movie that would be a direct throwback to Aboriginal storytelling, and he was also inspired by Greek mythology in another scene, but we'll get to those in a minute. But the real question is, what would be the point of incorporating the Pleiades myth into Mad Max? I mean, why? Well, I think the answer is actually simple. George Miller wanted to turn the final Mad Max movie into a full-blown mythical campfire story that's been passed on by generations. And really, it's not overtly shown in the movie itself, but the first press release for Fury Road from 2012 literally says that this movie is an account of the road war which follows. It is based on the word burgers of the history men and eyewitness accounts of those who survived. Yeah, but check this out. The biggest kicker is that Fury Road was actually supposed to be framed not only as a myth told by somebody from the far future, you know, this history man, but it was also supposed to be framed as a myth that's been already known for ages by the Aboriginals. And I know this sounds crazy, but the proof is right in the script. This is the original script for Fury Road from 2002, and there is a scene in it that to me always felt confusing and out of place. And I'm of course talking about the premonition scene. In the original script, the Aboriginal man would appear just out of thin air and walk up to Max saying, "I know you." And Max replies, "I don't think so." To which the ancient Aboriginal man replies, "I know you. I know you." And then he moves his hand in the road warrior's face, and Max does the same. Then the man disappears, and Max is just left totally confused. Now, this scene was heavily pushed by Brendan McCarthy. Why? Because it literally shows that this entire movie is a mythical Aboriginal tale. The Aboriginal man just straight up tells Max that he knows him, like 3 times, which echoes what happened to George Mannix when he showed Aboriginal elders the story of Mad Max 3 when they were location scouting. They already knew Max's story as well. And to prove that this Aboriginal man already knows the story of Fury Road from the legends, he moves his hand, Max does the same, and this move will save Max's life later in the film. So in other words, the Aboriginal man already knows what's gonna happen in the story. So yeah, the entirety of Fury Road was not only a campfire myth told by some history man from the far future, but also a story known by the Aboriginals for ages. Or in other words, Fury Road was supposed to be a common myth. Just like the myth of the Pleiades, you know? I mean, that was the plan for Fury Road, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, this message got lost in the final version of the movie. The Aboriginal man was replaced with Glory, a child that Max failed to save before Fury Road, and she haunts him, but somehow she also knows the future for whatever reason, which makes no sense now. But you know, at least now we know what this scene was supposed to be about. But there's also one more thing about storytelling that George Miller wanted to weave into Fury Road. You see, he's very vocal about the role of the observer in stories. The idea is that there is no story without an audience.
There is no story without somebody to observe it. You watch your cat. It carries in its DNA so much programming, so much information, but you need an observer. The cat is not aware of its narrative. And so story is something that is deeply ingrained in us as individuals and as a collective.
And this is shown in a scene with the Vuvolini and the wives sitting on the dunes at night. They spot a satellite that was used to broadcast shows across the earth, and they wonder if there's still someone out there sending shows. In other words, they wonder if there's some storyteller coming up with new stories and telling them to everyone. And the answer is a resounding yes. That storyteller is George Miller, and we are the audience. We are watching his story, and the characters in his story are not even aware that they're in a narrative. They're not aware that they're in a story. See what I'm getting at? Just like Max when he encountered the Aboriginal man who knew the story of Fury Road already. Max was so baffled by this whole encounter that, you know, it almost felt like he met somebody from a different dimension. And in a way, he did. The Aboriginal man was the storyteller that just busted into the story himself, breaking the fourth wall, and told Max that he knows him, and he showed him the future events, leaving Max totally confused as hell because he wasn't aware that he is in a story. But if you think I'm overanalyzing this movie, you should probably listen to Nicola Thuris, Fury Road's script analyst. It literally took him 10 months to analyze the script for Fury Road just to figure it out, and before he even started contributing to it.
I looked at it and thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? You know, it's just like this crazy, mad, what am I doing here? So I worked by myself for probably about 10 months before I actually really started engaging with George.
So, having said all of this, there's still one very important question to answer. I mean, why? Why would George Miller do this to a Mad Max movie? You know, just go full on and turn it into a common myth. Well, I think he did it to kind of redeem himself from the first Mad Max, where he accidentally tapped into a universal hero archetype and that launched his career. I mean, for a long time, George Miller didn't feel like a brilliant director, and Mad Max, to him, was a fluke. So, to prove that he learned a lot and he knows his stuff, he packed Fury Road with a ton of things. And this time, it was deliberate. And it was deliberately framed like a universally recognized common myth, you know, akin to the myth of the Pleiades. Because keep in mind, back when they wrote this movie, this was supposed to be the final Mad Max movie, period. No more. And what better way to wrap up a franchise than with a movie that could be picked apart for many years to come because it has so many layers to it. I mean, Fury Road was literally designed to be a very simple story on the surface. But when you start digging underneath the tip of this iceberg, it reveals itself to be richer in details than anyone could ever imagine.
You can take an apparently simple story and you can load it with a lot of subtext. We actually tried to give a backstory not only for the characters, but for each vehicle, for each weapon, even for the language. Everybody designing the movie had to understand where that object came from.
It's literally a playground for anyone who wants to find out some facts about this world that George Miller created, and it's also a very potent ground for theories such as the one that I came up with. And whether I'm right or wrong on how Fury Road was made and what it was inspired by, ultimately it really doesn't matter that much, because it's just my theory. You don't have to agree with it, and if you do or you don't, just leave a comment in the section. And having your own theories is perfectly fine because, in the words of Freddie Mercury himself,
again, a quote from an English rock star, Freddie Mercury, when asked a meaning for Bohemian Rhapsody, said, "If you see it, darling, it's there."
So there you go. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like and drop some comments down below, especially if you have your own theories on the subject. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more and hit that bell icon to be notified when the new video comes out. But until then, stay shiny and chrome.